Great pleasure to welcome you and to welcome Mr. Cronenberg to our panel on David Cronenberg today.
Hello. Thanks for the welcome. I do live here. Thanks for flying into Toronto. Well, I've never left, so.
One of the things that we've been asked over and over again since we've been doing this is, why isn't David Cronenberg the guest of honor? Where's David Cronenberg? And a lot of people know who live in town. But this is the first year you haven't had a scheduling conflict. Is that correct?
Yeah. It's usually just a matter of time. Always. I actually just finished a movie, shooting it in Germany. And I've only been back from there for about a month. I'm in the editing room. And we were in Cologne, mostly in the studio. And it's kind of hermetically sealed, you know, you're in the dark a lot. It's interesting. And then we did go to the south of Germany. There was a beautiful lake for three weeks. Lake Constance, it's called. And but I kind of felt like I really wanted to get out and see people, you know. I had been sort of with my crew, which is a great crew, and my actors. It's Keira, Knightley, and Viggo, Mortensen, and Vincent Cassel, and Michael Fassbender. But it was a perfect. It's not always just scheduling timing, but it's emotional timing too. You know, I mean, if you're really feeling like you need to write and be alone, then you don't really want to go out and meet a lot of people. But I was ready. I'm ready for this.
So your film that you just completed is very Freudian and Jungian, very literally.
Yes.
Maybe tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, it's called The Dangerous Method. It's based on a play by Christopher Hampton that was called The Talking Cure. And it's about Sigmund and Freud and Carl Jung and the birth of psychoanalysis at the turn of the 20th century. It begins in 1904 and ends in about 1912. And the three main characters are Freud, Jung, and a woman named Sabina Spielrein, who was not very well known until the 1970s when people discovered a cache of letters that she involved her that were discovered in Geneva, in Switzerland, and to the surprise of many people who had never heard of her, or maybe seen one or two pieces that she had published in psychoanalytic journals, she was a huge influence on both Freud and Jung. And she started off as a patient of Jung's. She was crazy. And it's interesting how certain madnesses disappear. You know, there was a disease called hysteria, from the word, the Greek word that means womb. It was considered to be mainly a woman's disease, hysteria, and women would get hysterical, and they would fall down, and they would faint, and they would mumble, and they would talk. Nobody talks about this disease anymore. It's interesting how some diseases are culturally created rather than physiologically. And that was one of them, I think. Really, she was a passionate, intelligent, very creative woman who didn't have an outlet for any of those things, and so it manifested itself as madness until she met Carl Jung. She was 18, he was about 29. They had an affair. She became his mistress, and that's sort of. So it's the story of the three of them, particularly, and it's a really fascinating story.
Well, knowing your work, and there's this long-standing interest in the idea of infection, what you just mentioned, as well with hysteria and so on. Is that the hook for you? What is the hook for this film? Why are you interested in making it?
Well, sometimes it's really hard to know why you make a movie. You sometimes don't discover that. I mean, I've often said, ad nauseum, maybe, forgive me if I repeat myself, but that you make a movie to discover why you made the movie, why you wanted to make the movie. You don't really necessarily know why in a way that you can articulate. Now, certainly, I've been very fascinated by Freud, as not just the father of psychoanalysis, but as a writer, as an artist, and as an iconic figure, character in cultural history and intellectual history. I didn't know that much about Jung. I knew that they had a huge falling out and a split, and that Jungian psychology, Jungian analysis is quite different from Freudian analysis, and so on and so on. And neither one of them, I mean, if you talk to a student of someone who is learning to be a psychiatrist or a psychoanalyst, they don't even mention Freud and Jung. They don't talk about them anymore. It's all cognitive and behavioral theory and so on. But they did begin, what became psychoanalysis. So I just was fascinated by those characters, and to do a period piece based on real people is very interesting. It's quite different from doing a movie about completely invented characters, of course. You have some restrictions, but then you also have incredibly rich material given to you. You have a whole lifetime of a person, and in the case of these characters, you have a lifetime of people having written for 100 years about these people. So it's very rich, dense kind of material that you can get. But it was really the addition of Sabina that made it come alive. Rather than doing a biopic about Sigmund Freud, this is not that. It's really quite dramatic and interesting. It's a strange menage a trois, Not that Sabina ever had an affair with Freud, but she did leave Jung and then go study with Freud. And to Jung, that was like a total betrayal. It was worse than if she had just slept with Freud. It was an intellectual and spiritual betrayal. All of that is really interesting. They were very passionate, articulate, hyper-intellectual people at a very interesting stage of European culture. I found it irresistible to do. And the costumes are great. If you were all dressed like them, it would be fantastic.
There was a piece in the Star